I was sitting in my living room on a Tuesday morning in mid-February, watching the snow fall outside my window in Rochester, Minnesota, when I heard the doorbell ring 3 times in rapid succession. The kind of aggressive ringing that tells you someone is either having an emergency or is about to make one your problem. I had a pretty good guess which one it was. My wife Amanda had left for her shift at the emergency dispatch center about 2 hours earlier, kissing me goodbye and joking about how I should try not to cause any trouble while she was gone. I had laughed at the time, not knowing how prophetic that statement would turn out to be. I set down my coffee mug and walked to the front door, already preparing myself for whatever complaint was about to come my way. Through the frosted glass panel, I could see the unmistakable silhouette of Deborah Patterson, the president of our homeowners association and the bane of my existence for the past 3 years. She was a woman in her late 40s with a severe bob haircut that looked like it had been cut with a ruler and dyed an unnatural shade of blonde. Her face was already red, which I could see even through the distorted glass, and she was holding what appeared to be a clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. I opened the door and immediately regretted it as a blast of cold February air hit me square in the face. "Morning, Deborah. What can I do for you?" "Zachary Garrison, do not play dumb with me," she said, her voice already raised to what I considered her default setting of righteous indignation. "You know exactly why I am here. That monstrosity in your front yard is a complete violation of our community standards, and I will not stand for it any longer." I looked past her to where she was pointing, at the large pile of snow I had been accumulating in the corner of my front yard for the past 2 weeks. It was about 8 feet tall at this point, an impressive mound of white that I had been carefully sculpting and packing down. My neighbor's kids loved it, and I had been planning to help them turn it into an elaborate snow fort once I got it to the right size. "Deborah, it's a pile of snow. We live in Minnesota. There's snow everywhere." "That is not just a pile of snow," she said, jabbing her finger at me like a weapon. "That is an eyesore. It is blocking the view of your house from the street, and it is absolutely against our HOA regulations regarding lawn maintenance and aesthetic standards. I have documented everything, and I am prepared to fine you $500 per day until it is removed." I took a deep breath and counted to 5 in my head. Amanda had been teaching me this technique to deal with Deborah ever since we moved into this neighborhood. "Deborah, it's February. In Minnesota. The snow is going to melt in a few weeks anyway. I'm not hurting anyone, and the kids in the neighborhood are having fun with it. Can we just let this one go?" "Absolutely not," she said, her face getting even redder. "Rules are rules, Zachary. If I let you get away with this, then everyone will think they can just do whatever they want. Next thing you know, people will be painting their houses neon colors and parking boats in their driveways." "Mrs. Henderson has had a boat in her driveway for 2 years, I pointed out. "That is different. She has a medical condition. Her medical condition requires a boat." Deborah's nostrils flared. "Do not sass me, young man. I am giving you until noon today to remove that snow pile, or I will be taking further action. And that is my final word on the subject." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, nearly slipping on a patch of ice but catching herself at the last second. I watched her get into her pristine white SUV and drive away, probably heading to terrorize some other poor soul in the neighborhood. I closed the door and pulled out my phone to text Amanda. "Your best friend Deborah just stopped by. Apparently my snow pile is the greatest threat to Western civilization since the fall of Rome." She texted back almost immediately. "Oh no. What did she say?" "The usual. Fines, violations, the end of society as we know it. She gave me until noon to get rid of it. Are you going to? What do you think? That's my man. I'll bring home pizza for dinner. You're going to need your strength for whatever happens next. I went back to my coffee and tried to enjoy the rest of my morning, but I kept glancing at the clock. Noon came and went, and I deliberately did not touch the snow pile. I even went outside and added a few more shovelfuls to it, just to make a point. The neighborhood kids, Tyler and Emma from 2 houses down, came by around 2 in the afternoon and asked if they could start building the fort. I helped them for about an hour, showing them how to pack the snow tightly and create stable walls. Around 4 in the afternoon, just as the sun was starting to set and paint everything in shades of orange and pink, I heard a car pull up in front of my house. This time it was Deborah's SUV, along with another car I recognized as belonging to Harold Montgomery, the vice president of the HOA and Deborah's loyal sidekick. Harold was a thin man in his 60s who always wore a suit, even on weekends, and had a mustache that looked like it belonged in a 1920s silent film. They both got out and marched up to my door together. This time I was ready for them. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Zachary Garrison," Deborah said formally. "It is now past the deadline I gave you this morning. You have failed to comply with my direct order to remove the unauthorized snow accumulation from your property. Therefore, I am officially issuing you a fine of $500 for today, with an additional $500 to be assessed for each day the violation continues." "Deborah, this is ridiculous. It's snow." "It is a violation," Harold chimed in, his voice nasally and grating. "We have rules in this community for a reason, Mr. Garrison. Those rules apply to everyone equally, with no exceptions. Except for Mrs. Henderson and her boat." "That is a completely different situation," Deborah snapped. "Now, are you going to remove this pile, or do I need to take further action?" "What further action could you possibly take? It's frozen water. It's going to melt on its own. If you will not remove it voluntarily, then I will have no choice but to call the authorities and report you for creating a public nuisance and a safety hazard." I actually laughed at that. "You're going to call the cops on me for having a snow pile in Minnesota in February? If that is what it takes to maintain the standards of this community, then yes, I absolutely will." She pulled out her cell phone and held it up like a threat. "This is your last chance, Zachary. Remove the pile now or I make the call." I crossed my arms and leaned against the door frame. "Go ahead, Deborah, make the call." Her eyes narrowed and I could see her finger trembling slightly as she unlocked her phone. "Fine. You have left me no choice. I am calling 911 right now to report this violation." "Deborah, 911 is for emergencies. You can't just call them about a snow pile. This is an emergency. You are violating community standards and creating a dangerous situation. That absolutely qualifies." I should have stopped her. I should have just agreed to move some of the snow around or something. But I was so tired of her constant harassment, her endless complaints about every tiny thing anyone in the neighborhood did. I wanted to see her face when the dispatcher told her she was wasting emergency resources on something this stupid. She dialed the 3 numbers with exaggerated precision, making sure I could see each one. Then she put the phone on speaker, probably so Harold could witness my humiliation. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. 911, what is your emergency?" I recognized Amanda's voice immediately, and I had to bite my lip to keep from grinning. "Yes, hello. This is Deborah Patterson calling from 2847 Maple Grove Lane in the Willowbrook Estates neighborhood. I need to report a dangerous public nuisance and code violation that the homeowner is refusing to address despite multiple warnings. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear Amanda processing what she was hearing and trying to figure out who was calling. "Madam, can you describe the nature of the emergency?" "Yes. The homeowner at this address has created an enormous pile of snow in his front yard that is completely out of control. It is at least 8 feet tall, it is blocking sight lines, and it poses a serious safety risk to the community. I have asked him repeatedly to remove it, and he has refused. I need someone to come out here immediately and force him to comply with our community regulations." The pause on the other end of the line was longer this time. Then I heard it, the sound I had been hoping for, a barely suppressed snort of laughter. "I'm sorry, madam," Amanda said, her voice strained as she clearly tried to keep herself under control. "You're calling 911 to report a pile of snow." "Yes, this is a serious matter. He is in clear violation of our HOA regulations, and he is creating a hazardous condition." "Madam, what address are you calling from?" 2847 Maple Grove Lane in the Willowbrook Estates. Another pause. I knew Amanda was pulling up the address in her system, confirming what she already suspected. "And you're standing at this address right now?" "Yes. I am directly in front of the violator's house, and he is standing right here refusing to comply with my direct orders." "Madam, can you put the homeowner on the phone, please?" Deborah looked at me triumphantly and thrust the phone toward me. "The dispatcher wants to speak to you. I hope you are prepared for the consequences of your actions." I took the phone, making sure to keep it on speaker. "Hello." "Hi, honey," Amanda said, and I could hear the grin in her voice. "How's your day going?" Deborah's face went from red to white in about half a second. Harold's mouth dropped open. "What?" Deborah sputtered. "What did she just call you?" "This is my wife," I said calmly. "Amanda, say hi to Deborah and Harold from the HOA." "Hi, Deborah, hi, Harold," Amanda said cheerfully. "Madam, I need to inform you that calling 911 for a non-emergency situation like this is actually a misuse of emergency services. My husband having a snow pile in his yard in the middle of winter is not a public safety issue, and it's definitely not something that requires police intervention. But he's violating our HOA regulations," Deborah practically shrieked. "That's a civil matter between you and the homeowner, madam. It has nothing to do with emergency services. If you have an issue with HOA violations, you need to follow your association's internal procedures or take it to civil court. What you don't do is call 911 and take resources away from actual emergencies." "This is outrageous," Deborah said, snatching the phone back from me. "I demand to speak to your supervisor." "That would be Captain Morrison," Amanda said, her voice now taking on a more professional tone. "But I should warn you that he's going to tell you the same thing I just did. In fact, if you keep calling 911 for non-emergencies, you could be cited for misusing emergency services." "Are you threatening me?" "No, madam. I'm informing you of the law. Now, is there an actual emergency that requires immediate assistance?" "No," Deborah said through gritted teeth. "Then I need to clear this line for actual emergencies. Have a good evening." Amanda disconnected the call. Deborah stood there for a moment, her face cycling through several different shades of red and purple. Harold looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Finally, Deborah turned to me with an expression of pure fury. "This is not over, Zachary Garrison, not by a long shot. I will find a way to make you remove that pile, and I will make sure you pay every single dollar of those fines. Your wife may think this is funny, but I assure you I do not. Deborah, maybe it's time to just let this go. It's snow. It's going to melt. No, you have humiliated me in front of my colleague, and you have shown complete disrespect for the rules of this community. I will be calling an emergency HOA board meeting for tomorrow night, and we will discuss further sanctions against you. You should also expect a formal letter from our attorney." She stormed off, with Harold scurrying behind her like a nervous puppy. I watched them drive away and then went back inside, pulling out my phone to call Amanda properly. She answered on the first ring. "Oh my God, Zach. I cannot believe she actually called 911 about your snow pile. Did you see her face when she realized who I was?" "It was pretty spectacular," I admitted. "But she's threatening to call an emergency HOA meeting and get their lawyer involved now. Let her. She can't actually make you get rid of the snow pile. It's your property, and there's nothing dangerous or illegal about it." "Yeah, but you know how she gets. She's going to make this as difficult and expensive as possible." "Well, we'll deal with it. Right now, I've got 3 more hours on my shift and I need to keep this line clear. But when I get home, I want to hear every detail of her face when she heard me call you honey." "Deal. Love you. Love you too. And Zach, maybe add a little bit more to that snow pile tomorrow, just to make a point." I hung up grinning and spent the rest of the evening thinking about what Deborah might pull next. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, I found a formal letter taped to my front door. It was printed on official HOA letterhead and was signed by both Deborah and Harold. The letter informed me that an emergency meeting of the Willowbrook Estates, Homeowners Association Board of Directors, had been scheduled for 7 o'clock that evening at the community center. The sole item on the agenda was listed as discussion and resolution of ongoing violations by resident at 2847 Maple Grove Lane. It also informed me that my presence was strongly encouraged and that decisions could be made in my absence if I chose not to attend. Amanda read the letter over breakfast and shook her head. "She's really going all out on this, isn't she? That's Deborah for you. She can't stand anyone questioning her authority. Are you going to go?" "Oh, I'm definitely going. I wouldn't miss this for anything." That evening, I drove the short distance to the Willowbrook Estates Community Center, a small building near the entrance to the neighborhood that was mainly used for HOA meetings and the occasional birthday party. When I walked in, I found about 20 people already seated in folding chairs facing a table at the front of the room where Deborah, Harold, and the other 3 board members sat looking official and severe. Deborah's expression when she saw me walk in was priceless. She clearly hadn't expected me to actually show up. I took a seat in the front row and gave her a friendly wave. Several of my neighbors were there too, including Bill and Sarah Chen from across the street, and Mrs. Henderson with her famous boat situation. Deborah called the meeting to order by banging a gavel on the table with unnecessary force. "This emergency meeting of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association Board of Directors is now in session. We are here tonight to address a serious and ongoing violation of our community standards by Mr. Zachary Garrison of 2847 Maple Grove Lane." She stood up and pulled out a laptop, projecting photos of my snow pile onto a screen behind her. She had apparently spent a good portion of her day documenting it from every possible angle. "As you can see from these photographs, Mr. Garrison has constructed an enormous pile of snow in his front yard that is completely inappropriate for our community. This pile is unsightly, it blocks the view of his property from the street, and it sets a terrible precedent for other residents." "It's just snow," someone called out from the back. I turned to see it was Bill Chen. "It is not just snow," Deborah snapped. "It is a deliberate violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of our community bylaws, which states that all landscaping must be maintained in a neat and attractive manner consistent with community standards." "But it's winter," Sarah Chen said. "Everyone has snow in their yards." "Not like this," Deborah said. clicking to another photo that showed the pile from a dramatic low angle that made it look even bigger than it actually was. This is excessive, it is deliberate, and Mr. Garrison has repeatedly refused to remove it despite multiple warnings and the assessment of appropriate fines. I raised my hand. "Can I say something?" Deborah looked like she wanted to refuse, but Harold leaned over and whispered something to her. She nodded stiffly. "Mr. Garrison, you may address the board." I stood up and turned to face the other residents. "Look, I get that Deborah thinks my snow pile is some kind of crisis, but let's be honest about what this really is. It's February in Minnesota, we have snow. I've been piling it up in my yard because I have to put it somewhere when I shovel my driveway, and I've been working with the neighborhood kids to build a snow fort. That's it. I'm not hurting anyone, I'm not doing anything dangerous, and it's going to melt in a few weeks anyway. This is Deborah being Deborah and trying to control every single aspect of everyone's lives." A few people nodded and murmured in agreement. Deborah's face started turning red again. "This is not about control, Mr. Garrison. This is about maintaining the property values and standards that we all agreed to when we moved into this community." "Did we, though?" Mrs. Henderson spoke up, her voice surprisingly strong for someone in her 70s. "Because I don't remember agreeing that the HOA president could decide that snow is a violation. That seems like a bit of a stretch, even for you, Deborah. Mrs. Henderson, with all due respect, this does not concern you." "Well, it kind of does, since you're setting a precedent for what kind of ridiculous complaints you can make up. Next thing you know, you'll be fining me because my boat isn't the right shade of white." Several people laughed at that. Deborah banged her gavel again. "Order. This is a formal hearing, not a comedy show. The board has reviewed the evidence and the applicable bylaws, and we have determined that Mr. Garrison is indeed in violation. Therefore, we are prepared to vote on the following resolution: that Mr. Garrison be required to remove the snow pile within 24 hours, and that he be assessed a fine of $500 for each day the violation has existed, plus $500 for each day it continues to exist until it is removed." "That's insane," I said. "You're talking about thousands of dollars for a pile of snow. Rules are rules, Mr. Garrison. All those in favor of the resolution." Deborah raised her hand. Harold immediately raised his. The other 3 board members looked at each other uncomfortably. Finally, one of them, a woman named Patricia Flores, spoke up. "Deborah, I think this might be a bit excessive. It really is just snow. Patricia, we need to send a clear message that violations will not be tolerated. But it's going to melt anyway. Why don't we just table this until spring and see if there's still an issue then? Because, if we do that, we are essentially telling everyone in this community that they can ignore our bylaws whenever they feel like it." The discussion went back and forth for another 20 minutes, with the board members debating among themselves while the rest of us watched. Finally, they called for a vote. Deborah and Harold voted in favor of the fines. Patricia and another board member named Dennis Wright voted against. That left the tie-breaking vote to the 5th board member, a quiet man named Robert Sullivan who had barely said a word all evening. Robert cleared his throat. "I think we need to be reasonable here. It's winter, it's Minnesota, and it's snow. I vote no on the fines." Deborah looked like she had been slapped. "This is unacceptable. Robert, you are not taking your responsibilities seriously." "I'm taking them very seriously, Deborah. That's why I'm not voting to fine someone thousands of dollars over something that's going to melt on its own." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that, with Deborah arguing with the other board members while various residents shouted their own opinions. Finally, Harold suggested they table the discussion and reconvene next week, which everyone agreed to just to end the meeting. I walked out feeling cautiously optimistic. At least the board hadn't voted to fine me into oblivion. But I knew Deborah wasn't going to let this go. Sure enough, the next morning I found another letter on my door. This one informed me that while the board had not yet voted on the fines, Deborah was still assessing them in her capacity as HOA president, and that I now owed $3,000 for 6 days of violations. I took a photo of the letter and sent it to Amanda. She's completely lost it. Amanda called me immediately. "Zach, she can't just assess fines without a board vote. That's not how HOAs work. Try telling her that." "No, I mean legally she can't do that. HOAs have to follow their own bylaws and they can't just make up fines without proper procedure. You should talk to a lawyer." I spent the morning researching HOA law in Minnesota and quickly realized Amanda was right. Deborah was way overstepping her authority. I called a real estate attorney named Jennifer Mills who had an office in downtown Rochester and explained the situation. She listened patiently and then laughed. "Mr. Garrison, your HOA president is setting herself up for a lawsuit. She can't unilaterally assess fines without a proper board vote, and even if the board did vote for fines, they would be hard-pressed to justify them for something as temporary as a snow pile. You have a very strong case if you want to push back on this. What would that involve?" "Well, first I would send a letter to the HOA explaining why these fines are invalid and demanding they be rescinded. If they refuse, we could file a lawsuit for harassment and improper use of HOA authority. We might even be able to get your attorney's fees paid by the HOA if we win." I thought about it for a moment. Part of me just wanted to move some of the snow around and make this whole thing go away. But another part of me, the part that was tired of years of Deborah's constant complaints and power trips, wanted to fight back. "Let's do it," I said. "Send the letter." 2 days later, Deborah received a formal letter from Jennifer Mills explaining in detailed legal language why her fines were invalid and demanding that she rescind them immediately. She showed up at my door that evening, practically vibrating with rage. "You hired a lawyer. Over snow. You tried to fine me $3,000, Deborah. Over snow. What did you expect me to do? I expected you to follow the rules like everyone else in this community. I am following the rules. You're the one who's making up violations that don't exist. That pile is a clear violation of our landscaping standards, according to your interpretation. But the board didn't agree with you, and you don't have the authority to assess fines on your own. So either rescind the fines, or we'll see you in court." She stood there sputtering for a moment, clearly trying to think of a response. Finally, she said, "Fine. If that's how you want to play this, then fine. But I will find something, Zachary. You are not perfect, and sooner or later, you will make a real violation, and when you do, I will come down on you with everything I have. Looking forward to it, Deborah." She left, and I thought that might finally be the end of it. But I had underestimated just how petty and determined Deborah could be. Over the next week, I started receiving violation notices for everything imaginable. My mailbox was supposedly the wrong shade of black. My house numbers weren't properly illuminated. My garbage cans were visible from the street for 7 minutes after the trash had been picked up. Each notice came with a threat of fines if the violation wasn't corrected immediately. Amanda started keeping a folder of all the notices, organizing them by date and type of alleged violation. "This is harassment," she said one evening, spreading them out on our dining room table. "She's clearly targeting you because you fought back on the snow pile thing. I know, but what can I do about it? You call your lawyer back and you add harassment to the lawsuit." I contacted Jennifer again, and she reviewed all the notices Deborah had been sending. Her response was immediate and decisive. Mr. Garrison, this is absolutely harassment and it's actionable. I'm going to amend our letter to the HOA to include all of these frivolous violations, and I'm going to strongly suggest that they need to rein in their president before this turns into a very expensive lawsuit for them. The amended letter went out the next day. That evening, I got a phone call from Patricia Flores, the board member who had voted against the fines at the meeting. Mr. Garrison, this is Patricia from the HOA board. I want to apologize for what Deborah has been doing. Several of us on the board had no idea she was sending you all these violation notices until we got the letter from your attorney. So you're aware of how ridiculous this has gotten. We are, and we're not okay with it. We're calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow night to address Deborah's conduct. I can't promise anything, but I want you to know that not everyone on the board supports what she's been doing. The next night, I didn't attend the HOA meeting, but Amanda and I stayed up late waiting to hear what happened. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Patricia again. Mr. Garrison, I wanted to let you know what happened tonight. The board voted 4-1 to rescind all the fines Deborah assessed against you, and we also voted to issue her a formal reprimand for harassment. We've made it clear that she needs to stop targeting you, or we'll have to consider removing her as president. Wow. Thank you, Patricia. I really appreciate you and the other board members standing up for what's right. It's what we should have done from the beginning. Deborah has been out of control for a while now, and this situation with you finally made us realize we needed to do something about it. I hope this resolves things. I hung up feeling relieved. Finally, it seemed like this whole ridiculous situation was over. The snow pile was already starting to melt a bit as we moved into early March, and soon it would be gone entirely, and this would all just be a funny story to tell at parties. But Deborah wasn't done yet. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, I was out in my yard raking up some of the debris that had been revealed by the melting snow. The snow pile was down to about 4 feet now, and the kids had mostly abandoned it in favor of riding their bikes now that the weather was warming up. I was in a good mood, enjoying the spring sunshine and thinking about what I wanted to plant in my garden this year. I heard a car pull up and looked over to see Deborah getting out, but this time she wasn't alone. She had brought someone with her, a man in his 30s wearing business casual clothes and carrying a clipboard and camera. Mr. Garrison, Deborah said formally, this is Kevin Wright from the City Code Enforcement Office. I have filed a formal complaint with the city regarding the condition of your property. What? I set down my rake and walked over to them. What condition? I'm literally out here cleaning up right now. The code enforcement officer looked uncomfortable. Sir, I'm here to investigate a complaint that you have an unsafe accumulation of snow on your property that may constitute a hazard. I looked at the sad, melting remnant of my snow pile and then back at him. You're kidding, right? I'm just here to do my job, sir. Can you show me the snow pile in question? I led him over to what was left of it. He walked around it, took a few photos, made some notes on his clipboard. The whole time, Deborah stood nearby with her arms crossed and a satisfied expression on her face. Finally, the officer turned to Deborah. Madam, I'm not sure what you expected me to find here, but this is just a pile of melting snow. There's nothing unsafe about it, and it's on private property. I can't issue a violation for this. Deborah's expression crumbled, but it's been here for weeks. It's enormous. It's 4 feet tall and it's melting. Sir, he turned to me, you're fine. Sorry to bother you on a Sunday. No problem, thanks for being reasonable. After he left, Deborah just stood in my yard staring at the snow pile like it had personally betrayed her. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Deborah, why are you doing this? Why can't you just let this go? She turned to look at me, and for the first time I saw something other than anger in her face. She looked tired and frustrated, almost defeated. "Because if I let you get away with this, then what's the point of having rules at all? What's the point of having an HOA if people can just do whatever they want? There's a difference between enforcing rules and making everyone's life miserable," I said. "The HOA is supposed to help maintain the community, not terrorize the people who live here." "I'm not terrorizing anyone. I'm trying to maintain standards. By calling the cops on me for having snow in my yard, by sending me violation notices about every tiny thing you can think of." "Come on, Deborah, you know that's not normal." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that surprised me. "Do you know why I care so much about this community? Why I spend so much time on the HOA? No, why? Because it's all I have. My kids are grown and moved away. My husband works 60 hours a week. This neighborhood, making sure it's perfect, it's the only thing in my life that I can actually control. And when people like you come along and just ignore the rules, it feels like everything is falling apart." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to point out that trying to control a neighborhood full of independent adults was neither healthy nor appropriate. But another part of me felt genuinely sorry for her. "Deborah, I think maybe you need to find some other interests. Some hobbies that don't involve monitoring your neighbor's every move. Because this isn't good for you, and it's definitely not good for the rest of us." She didn't respond, just turned and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away and wondered if maybe, finally, this was really over. Spring came to Rochester in earnest over the next few weeks. The snow pile melted completely, leaving just a wet patch in my yard that quickly dried out. I planted flowers in my garden, mowed my lawn, and generally enjoyed being able to spend time outside without freezing. Deborah kept a low profile, and I didn't receive any more violation notices. But then, in late April, things took a turn I never expected. I was at home on a Thursday afternoon when I saw a police car pull up in front of Deborah's house across the street. Then another one arrived. And then an unmarked sedan that I recognized as belonging to a detective. Amanda wasn't working that day, so I called her over to the window. "What do you think is going on?" she asked. "No idea, but that's a lot of cops for a routine call." We watched as officers went into Deborah's house. They were inside for about 20 minutes before they came back out with Deborah in handcuffs. She was crying, and her face was red and blotchy. Harold was there too, also in handcuffs, looking absolutely terrified. Amanda immediately called her contact at the police station to find out what was happening. What she learned made both of our jaws drop. Apparently, someone in the neighborhood had finally gotten suspicious about where all the HOA dues were going. Willowbrook Estates had about 100 homes, and everyone paid monthly dues that were supposed to go toward maintaining common areas, snow removal, landscaping, and other community expenses. But when a resident named Tom Brennan had requested to see the HOA's financial records, Deborah had refused. He had pressed the issue, eventually getting other board members involved. What they discovered was that Deborah and Harold had been embezzling money from the HOA for the past 3 years. They had created fake invoices from non-existent landscaping and maintenance companies, all of which they controlled through shell corporations. They had stolen over $200,000 from the community fund. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. That evening, there was an impromptu gathering of residents in the community center, everyone trying to process what had happened. Patricia Flores, who had taken over as interim HOA president, addressed the crowd. "I know everyone is shocked and upset by what we've learned today," she said. The police have assured us that they have solid evidence against Deborah Patterson and Harold Montgomery, and that charges will be filed. The board is working with our attorney to figure out how to recover the stolen funds and to ensure this never happens again. What about all the fines people have paid? Someone called out. I paid Deborah $800 last year for supposedly having the wrong color shutters. We're going to be reviewing all fines that were assessed over the past 3 years, Patricia said. If any of them were improper or excessive, we'll work to refund them. This is going to be a process, but we're committed to making things right. Over the next few months, the full scope of Deborah and Harold's scheme came to light. They had been systematically stealing from the HOA since shortly after Deborah became president. The fake companies, the inflated service contracts, the excessive fines that went directly into accounts they controlled, it was all part of an elaborate fraud. Amanda and I attended the preliminary hearing in August. Deborah and Harold both looked diminished somehow, smaller than they had seemed when they were running the HOA like their personal kingdom. They had both hired attorneys, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. Bank records, emails, fake invoices, all of it painted a clear picture of deliberate and sustained theft. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically. Deborah had started small, just skimming a little bit here and there. But over time, she had gotten greedier and more brazen. Harold had joined in about a year into the scheme, helping her create more elaborate covers for their theft. They had used the stolen money for vacations, home improvements, expensive purchases, all while constantly complaining that the HOA didn't have enough funds for basic maintenance. In October, both Deborah and Harold pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Deborah was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution. Harold got 3 years and his own restitution order. The judge, a stern woman named Catherine Brooks, didn't mince words. "You were entrusted with managing funds for your community," she said. "Your neighbors relied on you to be honest and fair. Instead, you betrayed that trust for personal gain. You didn't just steal money, you poisoned the sense of community that these people had worked to build." That kind of breach of trust deserves serious consequences. As I sat in that courtroom watching Deborah cry while the sentence was read, I thought about our confrontation in my yard back in February, when she had told me that the HOA was all she had. I wondered if that was really true, or if her obsession with control had driven away everything else in her life. I wondered if she had ever planned to steal from the HOA, or if it had just happened gradually, one small compromise after another, until she was in too deep to stop. Amanda squeezed my hand as we left the courthouse. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, it's just weird, you know. All of this started because she couldn't stand that I had a pile of snow in my yard, and now she's going to prison for fraud." "The snow pile didn't make her steal money from the HOA," Amanda said. "She did that all on her own. You just happened to be the person who finally pushed back against her bullying, and that ended up exposing everything else." The neighborhood went through a period of adjustment after everything came out. The new HOA board, led by Patricia, implemented strict financial oversight and transparency measures. They brought in an independent auditor to review all the books. They rewrote the bylaws to prevent any one person from having too much power. And they started actually focusing on improving the community rather than terrorizing its residents. Mrs. Henderson's boat stayed in her driveway, and nobody bothered her about it. Bill Chen painted his front door a cheerful red, which would have given Deborah an aneurysm, but which looked great with his house's gray siding. People started actually talking to each other again, instead of being afraid that any interaction might result in a violation notice. The following winter, when the snow started falling again in Rochester, I built another snow pile in my front yard. This one was even bigger than the last one, reaching almost 10 feet tall. The neighborhood kids loved it, and I helped them build an elaborate fort complete with tunnels and towers. Some of the other parents came out and helped too, and we ended up having an impromptu snow sculpture contest that became an annual tradition. Patricia stopped by one afternoon while I was out working on the fort with Tyler and Emma. "That's quite a pile," she said with a grin. "Too big?" I asked jokingly. "Not at all. I think it's perfect. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. The board is looking for volunteers to help with community events and activities. You seem to have a good relationship with the neighbors and their kids. Would you be interested in joining one of our committees?" I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep my distance from anything HOA related after everything that had happened. But another part of me realized that Deborah's abuse of power had only worked because most people were too intimidated or apathetic to get involved. "Sure," I said. "I'd be happy to help." "Great. We're planning a neighborhood barbecue for the summer, and we could use someone to help organize activities for the kids." Over the next year, I got more involved in the community, but in a positive way. I helped organize the barbecue, a Halloween party, and a winter festival. Amanda and I hosted a few gatherings at our house, and we got to know our neighbors as actual people rather than just faces we saw occasionally. The money that Deborah and Harold had stolen was partially recovered through the sale of Harold's house and some of Deborah's assets, though the community would never get back everything that had been taken. But Patricia and the board used what they did recover to make real improvements. Better lighting along the walking paths, upgraded playground equipment, and a community garden where residents could grow vegetables. One evening in early December, about 10 months after Deborah had been sentenced, I was out hanging Christmas lights on my house when a car I didn't recognize pulled up. A woman in her 30s got out, looking nervous. "Are you Zachary Garrison?" she asked. "That's me. Can I help you?" "My name is Melissa Patterson. I'm Deborah's daughter." I set down the string of lights I had been holding. "Oh, hi. I wanted to come by and apologize for what my mother did. I know she made your life difficult, and what she and Harold did to the community was inexcusable." "You don't have to apologize for your mother's actions," I said. "You're not responsible for what she did." "I know, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry anyway. I've been going to see her in prison, and she's been doing a lot of thinking about everything. She asked me to tell you that she's sorry too, for what it's worth." "How is she doing?" Melissa looked surprised by the question. "She's struggling. Prison is hard, especially for someone like her who's used to being in control of everything. But she's in therapy, and I think she's starting to understand how her need for control spiraled into something much worse. She'll never be the same person she was before, but maybe that's not entirely a bad thing." We talked for a few more minutes, and then Melissa left. I went back to hanging my Christmas lights, thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. It had started with such a stupid, petty conflict over a pile of snow, and it had ended with prison sentences and a community rebuilding itself. That night, Amanda and I sat on our couch drinking hot chocolate and looking at the Christmas tree we had put up in our living room. "Do you ever think about how different things might have gone?" she asked. "Like, what if you had just moved the snow pile when Deborah first complained about it?" "All the time," I admitted. "But then I remember that she would have just found something else to complain about, and if I hadn't pushed back, maybe no one ever would have. Maybe she and Harold would have kept stealing from the HOA for years. You can't really believe you're responsible for exposing their fraud. That was just a lucky coincidence." "Maybe. But I think there's something to be said for standing up to bullies, even when it seems easier to just go along. Because bullies usually aren't just bullies for one reason. People who abuse small amounts of power usually abuse larger amounts of power too. Amanda leaned her head on my shoulder. My philosophical husband, who knew a snow pile could teach us so much about human nature. Well, we do live in Minnesota. If we can't learn lessons from snow, what can we learn from? She laughed, and we sat there together, warm and comfortable in our home, watching the lights twinkle on the tree. Outside, snow was starting to fall again, covering the neighborhood in a fresh white blanket. Somewhere out there, Deborah was in a prison cell, probably thinking about all the choices that had led her there. And here in Willowbrook Estates, a community was healing and learning to function without fear of unreasonable violation notices and power-hungry board presidents. The next morning, I woke up to find 6 inches of fresh snow covering everything. I got dressed in my winter gear and headed outside with my shovel to clear the driveway. And of course, I pushed all that snow into a pile in the corner of my yard. By the time I was done, it was already a good 3 feet tall, and I was already thinking about how much bigger I could make it. Tyler and Emma came running over around noon, bundled up in their snowsuits and carrying plastic sleds. Mr. Garrison, can we start building the fort?" "Absolutely," I said. "Let me grab my gloves." We spent the next few hours packing snow and building walls, creating tunnels and designing battlements. Other kids from the neighborhood joined in, and eventually some of the parents too. By the time the sun started to set, we had created an impressive snow fortress that sprawled across half my front yard. Patricia drove by and honked her horn, giving us a thumbs up. Mrs. Henderson came out and took pictures. Bill and Sarah Chen brought over thermoses of hot chocolate for everyone. It was the kind of spontaneous community gathering that would have given Deborah an absolute fit, and that made it even more enjoyable. As I stood there watching the kids play in the snow fort, their laughter echoing through the cold air, I realized that this was what a community was supposed to be. Not a place where everyone lived in fear of breaking arbitrary rules, but a place where people could be themselves, where kids could play, where neighbors could come together and just enjoy life. A year ago, my snow pile had been the catalyst for exposing corruption and harassment. Now, it was just a pile of snow, turned into a fort by happy kids on a winter afternoon. And that, more than anything else, showed how much had changed in Willowbrook Estates. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and Amanda and I were making dinner, I got a phone call from Jennifer Mills, my attorney. "Mr. Garrison, I just wanted to let you know that we've finalized the settlement with the HOA regarding your legal fees from last year." "Oh yeah. What's the verdict?" "The HOA has agreed to pay all of your attorney's fees related to fighting the improper fines, plus an additional settlement payment for the harassment you endured. All told, you should be receiving a check for about $8,000. I nearly dropped the phone. $8,000. Yes. Given what we discovered about Deborah and Harold's embezzlement, the HOA wanted to make sure that everyone who had been mistreated during their tenure was properly compensated. Your case was particularly egregious, so they're offering a substantial settlement." After I hung up, I told Amanda the news. She whistled low. $8,000, that's a lot of money. "Yeah, you know what? I think we should use some of it to throw a big community party in the spring, really bring everyone together." "That's a great idea. Deborah would hate it." "Deborah would absolutely hate it," I agreed, grinning. As winter turned to spring, life in Willowbrook Estates continued to improve. The new HOA board was responsive and reasonable, focusing on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. The neighborhood felt more alive, with people actually spending time outside and interacting with each other. In May, we threw the community party we had planned, using part of the settlement money to rent a bounce house, hire a local band, and provide food for everyone. Over 100 people showed up, including some residents I had never even met before because they had been too intimidated by Deborah to participate in community events. The party was a huge success, and it became another annual tradition. Standing there watching my neighbors laugh and talk and enjoy themselves, I felt grateful for everything that had happened, even the bad parts. Because sometimes it takes a conflict, even one as silly as an argument over a snow pile, to reveal deeper problems and give a community the chance to fix them. One afternoon in June, I ran into Dennis Wright, one of the board members who had voted against Deborah's fines, at the grocery store. We chatted for a few minutes about the neighborhood and the upcoming 4th of July celebration the HOA was planning. "You know," Dennis said, "I've been on the HOA board for 5 years, and this past year has been the best one yet. People actually want to get involved now. We have volunteers for everything. It's like the whole neighborhood woke up." "I think people were always ready to be involved," I said. "They just needed to know that the HOA wasn't going to punish them for breathing wrong." "You're probably right." Deborah did a lot of damage to this community, but in a weird way, maybe exposing her crimes was the best thing that could have happened to us. We had to completely rebuild how we operate, and we did it right this time. That summer was one of the best I could remember. Amanda and I spent almost every evening outside, either working in our garden or sitting on the porch watching the neighborhood kids play. The community garden was thriving, with residents sharing vegetables and recipes. The walking paths were well lit and well maintained, actually making use of the HOA dues we all paid. In August, I got a letter from Melissa Patterson again. She wanted me to know that her mother was up for a parole hearing in 3 years, and that she was genuinely working on becoming a better person. The letter included a note from Deborah herself, handwritten on prison stationery. "Mr. Garrison," it read, "I know that no apology can undo the harm I caused to you and to our community. What I did was wrong on every level. I let my need for control consume me, and I hurt people who trusted me. I'm using my time here to try to understand why I made the choices I did, and to become someone who would never make those choices again. I hope that someday you and the others in Willowbrook Estates can forgive me, though I understand if you cannot. Sincerely, Deborah Patterson." I showed the letter to Amanda. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think that people can change, but they have to want to, and it sounds like maybe she's starting to understand what she did wrong. But that doesn't mean you have to forgive her right away or ever if you don't want to." "I don't know if I forgive her," I said slowly, "but I hope she does become a better person, not for me but for her own sake, because the person she was before was miserable even when she had all the power." As autumn arrived and the leaves started to change colors, I found myself thinking less and less about Deborah and the whole snow pile incident. It was becoming just another story, something that had happened and was now in the past. The neighborhood had moved on, and so had I. But then winter came around again, and with it, the snow. The first big snowfall of the season happened in late November, dropping almost a foot of white powder overnight. I woke up early to start shoveling, and by the time I had cleared my driveway, I had created the foundation for another magnificent snow pile. Tyler and Emma, now a year older and more experienced in snow fort construction, came by to help plan this year's fort. We spent hours discussing the design, debating whether we should build a castle or a spaceship or some kind of hybrid structure. Eventually, we settled on an elaborate snow castle complete with towers and a working drawbridge made from a piece of plywood. The project took us almost 2 weeks to complete, with kids and adults from all over the neighborhood contributing. It became the talk of Willowbrook Estates, with people driving by slowly to admire our creation. Someone even posted pictures of it on social media, and it got picked up by a local news station. A reporter named Michelle Torres came out to do a story about it, interviewing me and some of the kids about why we had built such an elaborate snow structure. "It's just a fun project that brings the community together," I told her. "Everyone's welcome to come help or just enjoy looking at it. That's what neighborhoods should be about." The story aired during the evening news, and I watched it with Amanda, laughing at how seriously Michelle Torres treated our snow castle. "And there you have it," she said in her professional news voice. "A neighborhood coming together to create something magical out of ordinary snow." This is Michelle Torres, reporting from Rochester. "We're famous," Amanda said, grinning. "Infamous, maybe. I'm sure there are HOA presidents all over Rochester watching this and having nightmares about snow piles taking over their communities." "Good. Let them have nightmares. At least we're having fun." The snow castle stood for the rest of the winter, gradually melting and settling but remaining recognizable until early March. By the time it finally disappeared completely, it had become a symbol of everything that had changed in Willowbrook Estates. It represented creativity over conformity, community over control, and joy over fear. On a warm afternoon in April, almost 2 full years after Deborah had first called 911 about my original snow pile, Patricia called me with some news. "Zachary, I wanted to let you know that we just finalized the lawsuit against Deborah and Harold's insurance company. The HOA is getting a significant payout that will fully fund our reserve account and allow us to do some major improvements." "That's great news, Patricia." "It is. And the board wanted to do something to thank you for your role in exposing what was happening. We know you never intended to uncover fraud. You were just defending yourself against unreasonable harassment. But your willingness to stand up and fight back is what ultimately led to us discovering the embezzlement. So, we're naming the new community garden pavilion after you, the Garrison Pavilion. We'll have a dedication ceremony next month." I was genuinely touched. "Patricia, that's incredibly kind, but you don't have to do that. We want to. You stood up when it would have been easier to just comply. You fought back against bullying and harassment. And because you did, this whole community is better off. Let us honor that." The dedication ceremony was held on a beautiful Saturday in May. The whole neighborhood turned out, and Patricia gave a speech about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it seems like a small thing. The pavilion itself was a lovely structure with a roof and picnic tables, perfect for community gatherings and a shelter from both sun and rain. "Thank you all for this honor," I said when it was my turn to speak. "But the truth is, I didn't do anything special. I just refused to be bullied over something ridiculous. And I got lucky that my wife happened to be the one answering the phone when Deborah called 911. The real heroes are people like Patricia and Dennis and Robert, the board members who were willing to vote against their own president when they saw she was wrong. The real heroes are all of you, for creating a community where people can be themselves without fear. This pavilion isn't just named after me. It's a symbol of all of us coming together to make this neighborhood the kind of place where people want to live." After the ceremony, we had another community party, with food and music and games for the kids. I stood under the new pavilion with Amanda, watching our neighbors enjoy themselves, and felt profoundly grateful for how everything had turned out. "You know what's funny?" Amanda said. "None of this would have happened if you had just moved that snow pile." "I know." Deborah would still be stealing from the HOA, Harold would still be helping her, and everyone would still be afraid to breathe wrong. All because of snow. All because you refused to be pushed around by a bully, Amanda corrected. The snow was just the excuse. She was right, of course. The snow pile had just been the visible symbol of a much larger issue. One person's abuse of power and a community's reluctance to stand up against it. By refusing to back down over something so small and silly, I had accidentally sparked a chain of events that had led to real, positive change. As the sun set over Willowbrook Estates that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I thought about Deborah in her prison cell, Harold in his, and the long road they still had ahead of them. I thought about the community that had been damaged by their greed and control, and how that same community had come together to heal and rebuild. And I thought about snow, ordinary winter snow, and how something so simple and temporary could become the catalyst for such dramatic change. Because that's the thing about standing up for yourself, even over small things. You never know what larger issues might be lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be exposed by someone who simply refuses to be unreasonable pushed around. The next winter, I built another snow pile. And the winter after that. It became my tradition, my small act of defiance and creativity that reminded everyone in Willowbrook Estates that this was a place where people could be themselves. Where kids could play, where neighbors could come together, where a pile of snow could just be a pile of snow without anyone calling the cops. And every time I started a new pile, every time I helped the neighborhood kids build another elaborate snow fort, I thought about that morning when Deborah had rung my doorbell with such aggressive urgency. I thought about her face when Amanda had called me, honey, over the 911 line. I thought about how certain she had been that she was right, that rules and control were more important than common sense and community. She had been wrong, of course, but it had taken a prison sentence and the loss of everything she valued for her to understand that. I hoped, genuinely hoped, that she was learning and growing from the experience. That when she eventually got out of prison, she would be someone who understood that power is supposed to be used to serve others, not to control them. But whether Deborah changed or not, Willowbrook Estates had changed. We had learned that communities thrive when people work together, when they focus on building each other up rather than tearing each other down. We had learned that standing up to bullies, even over something as silly as a snow pile, matters. And we had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to be unreasonable controlled. As I write this, it's winter again in Rochester, Minnesota. The snow is falling outside my window, accumulating in drifts and covering everything in white. Tomorrow morning, I'll wake up early and shovel my driveway, and I'll push all that snow into a pile in the corner of my front yard. Tyler and Emma will come by, older now but still enthusiastic about building snow forts. Other kids will join us, and probably some adults too. We'll spend hours in the cold, packing snow and building walls, creating something temporary but beautiful out of frozen water and imagination. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I'll remember Deborah's fury, Amanda's laughter over the 911 line, and the long, strange journey that started with 3 aggressive rings of my doorbell on a February morning. Because that's the thing about HOA Karens and snow piles and standing up for yourself. Sometimes the smallest conflicts reveal the biggest truths, and sometimes refusing to back down over something silly is exactly what a community needs to become something better.